What's up, everybody? Hello? All right. So 4 things that will make this keynote at a fintech conference very distinct. I'm only going to mention the blockchain once, and that's right now. I'm going to mention Oprah. I'm going to mention ISIS. And there's 124 pages and 25 minutes. So I'm going to jump in. The theme of the presentation is gradually, then suddenly, in financial services. How many of you, and there's some audience participation, so that means I need you all to participate. How many of you feel like the world is moving faster by show of hands? Okay. So I think we feel that in our personal lives, and it's happening in business. And I'm going to walk through that. That's me. I'll save you the commercial. That's me with more hair. For those of you who are clients, this keynote's a bit different than what we've done in the past. You'll see when you get the eventual presentation, there's links actually into the platform, and you'll see those on the left side of the page. So I will just you'll see that, and that's just an FYI. So we're going to cover a few things. One, sort of competition in markets moving faster. What are the impacts of failing to respond as a financial services incumbent? How can you respond? And then, what you should be watching. If we were you and at a big incumbent financial services firm, how and where to look, essentially. So let's talk about markets and competition moving faster. So the theme of this is gradually, then suddenly, which is taken from this Ernest Hemingway quote, which he asked, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And so that's sort of, again, what we're going to talk about as we talk about sort of disruption in financial services. So, corporations are sort of very vulnerable to this acceleration. And for those of you who have been here before, some of this will look familiar, right? This is the market caps of the largest companies in the world over time. So in 2006, you had Microsoft. In 2011, one tech company, Apple. In 2016, it's run the board. Some of these have moved amongst the tech companies, with Amazon obviously climbing a lot. But tech is sort of, as Mark Andreessen says, software is eating the world. Definitely seems to be the case. And here, probably in my Hall of Fame of visualizations, not mine, but one that we've seen, technology adoption over time. So you have the telephone, 1900 to 2005, it got to 90% penetration in US households. And then you have the cell phone and the internet got there in 15 years. And then you look at sort of tech platforms, and what you see here, Skype, Gmail, et cetera, growing very fast. Then Facebook kind of, took it to a new level. And then WhatsApp took it to a whole different level, right? So again, like, technology is growing very fast, and that creates a lot of change for those of you who are with large financial services firms. And here's what it looks like in financial services, right? So here's Venmo and their quarterly kind of volume growth. Here's Robinhood, right? And so you see, they went from 0.3 million to 4 million, and we'll kind of compare that against some incumbents in a bit. And then you look at Coinbase, right? And like that growth, right? And so that growth is not normal, right? We used to think of this as being something that happened in tech, but now it's happening in financial services. And historically, I think incumbent financial services firms would think about, well, when somebody becomes affluent enough, we'll then go after them. The problem is now those people who aren't sort of affluent enough, let's say, are being served by the likes of Coinbase or Robinhood. So can you just wait to sort of pluck them off later or not? And can you go downstream, and are your cost structures and are your businesses set up to do that? It's something you have to think about a lot when you see folks like Coinbase and Robinhood growing as they are. Everyone is a tech company, right? So, this is where we are in the cycle, right? But it is, I think people, putting aside the talk, it is real, right? So we did this analysis of Goldman's job listings, and, it's probably hard to read, but, the blue is their technology open jobs, right? So you see almost 50% of the positions at Goldman are in tech, right? So this growth in technology is one that is real, and you're seeing it in the talent that incumbents are recruiting, and here's a great illustration of that. And then, you see some really high-profile hires. Here's one by Goldman. JP Morgan also doing a lot in this world, and this is across the board. So, so talent and the kind of the shifting of talent at incumbent financial services firms is happening in a big way. So what's making business faster? It's two things. It's technology and data. And so how we think is changing, right? So I think one, we're moving to a more evidence-based way of thinking. We say sort of evidence over eminence, data over opinion, probability over punditry, pick any sort of phrase, but that's leading us to be sort of more rational and empirical. The redrawing of competitive lines, which we'll talk about a lot, is something that's happening in fin services. It's happening in every sector. And then sort of new markets get opened up because of innovation, because of distribution innovations, product innovations, et cetera. So we'll go into all of this. Gut instinct is no longer enough, right? Being the loudest person in the boardroom is not the way to make decisions anymore. And so there's a lot of data and technology available to make better decisions. And we've seen that in a variety of verticals, right? Moneyball in baseball and 538 in political forecasting, but Spotify playlists recommendations are another great example. Famous example from Target, where they were able to predict that a young woman was pregnant and were sending her ads, and her dad saw it and was like, what the hell are you sending my daughter ads for, saying she's pregnant, and then he found out she was. But again, data does these things, and data in financial services transforms markets, right? So now you'll see, and I think you'll hear about it today, people aren't using FICO scores or the credit ratings, right? They're using private data, right? So marketplaces can use their own data about sales, conversion, checkout metrics to determine, how creditworthy a particular vendor might be. Payments companies obviously have a lot of data about history there. And then within accounting software, there's a lot of data that one can use to make lending decisions. So again, private data coming to the fore to invite sort of new competitors into markets. And so what you see is, Amazon getting into this, and Square getting into the lending space, right? So these are the competitive lines being redrawn, which we'll talk about next. Nobody stays in their lane, right? So I used to work at American Express. When I was there, it was MasterCard, Visa, Discover on the network side. Then it was on the issuer side. It was Citi, Capital One, Bank of America, et cetera. That's changed dramatically. So, I'll just keep going. You had Benz, and now you have not just Lexus and BMW, you have Tesla and Google, you have Walmart and Costco and Target, and now it's Alibaba and Amazon, you have Comcast, and you get the idea, right? Netflix, YouTube, here you go again. So it's sort of in every industry, right? It's not a tech phenomena. Here you got Amex, Visa, et cetera, and then you have Venmo, Stripe, Adyen, et cetera. Here we talked about some of the examples, Coinbase, Robinhood. So again, across all of these, right? And so now when you look at, let's sort of compare everybody, this is the growth in E-Trade accounts over 5 years, right? So 2.9 to 3.7 million, decent growth, right? Here's Robinhood in that, a shorter time frame. They didn't launch with a product, right? They just got signups. They'd created buzz and sort of figured out a way to acquire users, and so they've eclipsed that. And then again, you put Coinbase on it, and you see kind of a whole different scale of user acquisition and accounts. When we talk about competitive lines being redrawn, so we do a lot of mining of earnings transcripts. So this is a look at, from 2008 to about 2016, which of the FAMGA companies were mentioned the most on earnings. From 2016 to date, who do you think which of these 5 companies is winning now? Any guesses? Google? Yeah, so it's Amazon, right? Everybody's got Amazon on the brain, and this is, Amazon's impact, right? And this is Amazon's impact on retail pharmacy, right? Just the rumor of them entering a space is a market cap killer, right? Then you have this product process innovation, right? So when we think about what's driving that, it's this launch of startups is one of the things. It's not the only thing. So the cost of launching a startup has dramatically come down, and you can see that over time. And so what that means is lots of people jumping into really thin what might be perceived as thin slices of the market, right? Now, I'll cover some more of these, but this is just the SMB fintech space, right? And you see like there's, various cuts of this at the insurance, accounting, invoicing, tax level, lots going on in just the SMB fintech space. And so what happens is you have all this sort of product distribution kind of innovation. So if we think about product, right, it's, well, how do you gain users using crypto as sort of an entry point distribution, using consumer tech platforms. We're going to talk about Alipay a bit. And then, at the biz model side of things, right, you have companies like Open Door, which basically get rid of the need for you to list your home. You just sort of, single click and list your home, and they'll give you an estimate, and they'll buy it from you and then resell it. So people really changing kind of the game on how things are done in fin services. So what are the impacts of failing to respond? It's death, right? That's basically what you're up against, right? It's sort of, a bad legacy, a company that's no longer at the top of its game. So this is the lifespan of S&P 500 companies over time. Very easy to see that it's come down dramatically. And so suddenly comes quickly. So I'm going to do some quizzes here. Which company is this? Which company do you think I'm about to talk about? Any guesses? BlackBerry, yeah. So this is gradually, and this is suddenly, and that is BlackBerry. This is one of my favorite quotes, actually, by the CEO of BlackBerry, because how many of you call your phone an email machine, right? It's such a good way of thinking about your phone. It's an email machine. Here's another thing. I think, U2 leaving you is probably a counter indicator, it seems, or joining you, rather, is a counter indicator, as we see, because they left Apple to join RIM. This one is probably a little harder to tell. Any guesses on who this is? This is Blockbuster, right? So another great seminal quote on how you want to be remembered. And then finally, a little bit more recent. Any guesses on this one based on the Uber hint? So this is Hertz, right? So when you compare sort of private market, public market valuations, you see kind of, you see where the value has gone and where the value has been destroyed. So adding to these competitive pressures, you have shareholders also getting more impatient, so activism, right? And so there's a lot going on with, when you fail to respond quickly or your business isn't as healthy as it needs to be, you've got, the activists jumping in, and so, you have it at P&G and Ford and Whole Foods, but then, now it's also coming to financial services, right? So Barclays and Citi kind of having at least some of these conversations going on with activists, right? So there's now pressure from competitors, there's pressure from your investors, there's pressures from new business models and new products. So how do you own the future if you're an incumbent in the space? So I think the popular narrative is you're all sheep and you're going to be disrupted. I think that's not probably fair. So how do you actually fight back against that? It's will and skill. I think the one big thing that we notice when we talk to big incumbent financial services firms is this general sort of immediate instinct to dismiss the upstart, right? It's to say, well, we're a highly regulated industry. That's my favorite one, right? Like that is the fallback, right? It's not that we serve the customer better or that the customer likes us better. It's just that we've got this regulatory lock-in and that's going to keep us safe. And there's a sort of desire not to acknowledge their existence. And I think I pulled this slide, but when you look at Amex's quarterly earnings, they just mentioned Venmo for the first time, I think just last year, right? And so Venmo is something that should be on the radar, but it wasn't, or at least there wasn't a desire to acknowledge it for whatever reason. And then there's sort of skill, right, which is moving away from this eminence-based way of making decisions and looking beyond your four walls. So, and this is sort of the dismissive kind of thing that people do, right? And then you end up being in keynote presentations. So, part of the reason is for this issue is that we get our ideas at big companies from the wrong places. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to customers and employees, but, customers and employees look out, just a little bit ahead. And so a lot of the things that are coming that are more game-changing don't necessarily come from those folks. So this doesn't mean don't listen to customers and employees. It just means look beyond just those sources. And so then what you end up with is this, right? And like, you know, this isn't where you want to be, right? I mean, this is a good idea, I think, but it shouldn't be all you do, right? And so then there's also this like natural desire to invent everything at home, right? And so this is okay, right? So this is this survey we did called the State of Innovation. So we surveyed about 700 sort of corporate strategy, innovation, growth folks. And you know, there's a definite preference for building versus partnering or buying. And building would be fine, except it's really slow, right? So it's taking you 24 months, you know, about a quarter of you to build, you know, it takes you more than 2 years, right? And if you look back at that Coinbase or Robinhood trend, you know, they're getting tens of millions of users in that time frame. So can you wait is sort of the big question. And so failing to see these long-term threats, you know, is a problem, right? And when you do, you kind of often are moving too slow. I'm just going to take a brief detour, all right? Please stop with the consortiums, right? So, you know, here we go, right? So it's odd to me that people who generally like are fighting in the trenches, who hate each other, then decide like we're going to get together and build a product together, and then this is what happens, right? It gets like sold off for parts or whatever. R3, you know, having some issues, at least reported, and then ISIS. I said I'd mention ISIS. So, you know, here's another example, which then, you know, was acquired the assets, right? So I think this idea of like, we'll all get together and we're going to compete on one side and then build a product that customers actually want by getting 30 big, giant, slow-moving companies together is a terrible idea, so please stop it. So what you should be watching, right? So we're going to talk about kind of some ways to figure out where to go, right? So where do you look for these sudden threats, right? One is, you know, I think there's a lot of value in looking at the competition. So that's one. Two is look at where the big markets are, right? That's where the insurgents are going to attack. And then look at who are the insurgent competitors. And I don't say startup competitors here because, you know, it's not just startups. It is definitely, that's one of the threats, but it's not just them. And we'll walk through these. So, you know, how do you get competitive intel on existing competition, right? The signals are out there, right? So this is an example, you know, if you look at PayPal is copying Square in many ways, right? And so you can see kind of some of the acquisitions and things that they've done recently, you know, kind of indicate they're copying that playbook. And there's nothing wrong with this, right? If you see a playbook that seems to be working, why not, right? So I think competitive intel here is really interesting. That's a patent that Square filed that, you know, looks like they might be getting into sort of crowdfunding as well. So that was, you know, just something that we'd picked up on. You know, then you look at earnings transcripts. So here you see kind of from our search engine, just looking at, you know, MasterCard's mentions of ACH. And then you can look at patents, right? So this is Goldman Sachs' patents over time. This is Q1 2015 to Q2 2016. These are the topics that we've identified from their patents. And you see kind of pretty traditional, kind of financially oriented patent topics. Here, fast forward, right? And I'll just make it, just to make it easier, right? Like now you're seeing a much more of a focus on technology, as I mentioned earlier. So again, tracking the competition to see what they're working on is one way to sort of stave off these sudden threats. Second is, you know, looking at where the profit pools are, right? So this was I guess a slide that leaked. It was Santander talking about TransferWise, right? And they basically said, you know, we have these profit pools which the upstarts can sort of hive off and own parts of, and so they were obviously worried about their money transfer business, right? And this is sort of where, you know, your margin is somebody else's opportunity. And so, you know, we have a lot of market sizing data now on CB Insights. So we just looked at, you know, within payments and lending, what are the market sizes of various spaces that folks are going to start to attack, right? And so this just gives you a view into some of the big profit pools or the big markets that folks will attack. How we do this is a little different. So we're sort of, if you're familiar with the Wall Street consensus estimate for earnings, we're basically doing that for industry analysts. So we're aggregating industry analyst estimates to come up with a consensus. So this is payments and lending. This is wealth management, right? This is insurance, right? So these are all giant spaces. So looking at where the big markets are is where either your Amazons or Alibabas or startups are going to attack. And so obviously that's one very good way to identify where you're vulnerable or where there's opportunities. And then finally, looking at the insurgents, the new competition, right? So I showed you the SMB fintech market map earlier, right? It's not just the SMB space, right? Here's what's going on in European insurance. Here's what's going on in capital markets, right? India's got a lot going on. And this is just, a sampling of sort of the different, parts of financial services that are sort of being unbundled. Here's wealth management. I think just yesterday we launched this post on Amazon in financial services. So this is Amazon unbundling the bank, right? So you got Chase's website in the middle, and then you have all of Amazon's services kind of around it, right? And so, I think the other thing is that we have to call competitors, right? So there's often this, well, they're a great partner kind of thing that we talk about to delude ourselves that somebody's not a competitor. Amazon probably is a great partner to many of you, but they are coming after elements of what you do in a big way, and there's no reason to not believe that that's happening. Finally, who's the 10th most valuable financial services firm in the world? Any guesses? Nobody? Which? It's Ant Financial, right? Great logo. In less than 15 years, has moved up the league tables in a massive way. And so, we talked earlier about user growth in the tech platforms. This is Alipay, their kind of payment platform, and its registered account growth over time, right? And so, 2005 to 2008, it almost got to 175 million. You should have been paying attention then, and then you saw the inflection point, and now we're at close to 800 million, right? So this is the type of kind of insurgent to really watch out for. And again, when we think about WhatsApp and Facebook, here's where Alipay fits. So it's no longer a tech thing. Tech has come to financial services. So this gradually then suddenly trend is one that you should be watching out for. That's all I've got. There's a bunch of the folks that are going to be disruptors to you over the next couple of days. Please pay attention to them. If you have questions about any of this, come find the CB Insights team or myself as well. But thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you soon.